Welcome back to La Pausa, a Pints and Punditry podcast here at the Pitchside pub. It is Thursday, February 1st. We've got transfer windows closing, we got games happening, we got multiple competitions, never a dull moment in the football world. But today, I want to talk about coaching changes, coaching decisions, and how clubs handle this, because there are a lot of examples taking place in the football world right now, and some clubs get it right, and some clubs get it really, really wrong, and they keep making the same mistakes over and over again, and a lot of it is just that, well, this is how it's always been done mentality, and the way it's always been done is not working. It's never really been working, and yet these clubs, these really smart billion-dollar clubs, just continue to get it wrong. So I'm going to talk about that in a couple. We got two examples today, but before we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, hit it down below. If you're listening to the podcast on Spotify, make sure you follow so you know every episode coming out Monday and Thursday. Get in the comment section. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. If you're listening on Spotify, you can follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub and get in the conversation there, because I'm going to be talking about a lot of these type things. Like I said, today I want to talk about coaches and the importance of longevity when it comes to coaching, particularly in European football. And it seems like an obvious thing, right? A coach sticks around a long time. Obviously he's doing something right, and that's better for everybody involved. But there's a few really nuanced reasons as to why that is, and that's what I want to talk about today. We're going to start with yesterday's example. It was the Liverpool-Chelsea game, and the game itself was relatively uneventful. Liverpool drubbed Chelsea 4-1. It's about what we all should have expected at this point from Chelsea, even though they've been playing a little bit better. But Liverpool, top of the table, leading the Premier League, and just having a great season. Plus, they're coming off all the Klopp news, and there's emotions, and so you sort of had to figure they were going to go in and take care of business. I don't think anybody expected a goal and 2 assists from Conor Bradley. Now, he's been playing lately, as Trent Alexander-Arnold's been out with a few injuries, and Bradley's been playing really well, and he's a young, up-and-coming player in their system. As he's been in really good form. But don't believe anybody who said they saw this coming, a goal and 2 assists against Chelsea in a big game like this, because they're lying to you. But really impressive performance. And so that's what I want to talk about today. Conor Bradley's performance against Chelsea was impressive, but to me it signified everything that's wrong with not just Chelsea, but with European football and how they handle hiring and firing managers and player development. Why did Bradley go out and outplay Enzo Fernandez and Moises Caicedo and other really expensive young talents who should theoretically be better than him? Well, the answer is continuity. Bradley has come up in the Liverpool system, played on their youth teams, went out on loan to Bolton last year to get some playing time, but his formative years were as a Liverpool academy grad. The common denominator of that system has been Jurgen Klopp. The downside to constantly firing managers is the lack of top-to-bottom continuity throughout your system. We see how new systems, tactics, player turnover affects the first team and young players, but what about the academy? Having a great manager like Klopp stay in one place for a decade allows a system to be installed at the top and trickle down to every level of the academy and actually stick around long enough for it to take hold. Players learn the system at a young age, so when a player like Bradley gets his opportunity, he's able to make a bigger impact immediately. Right now, that's the difference between Chelsea and Liverpool. Chelsea's had so many managers, right? They're on Pochettino, they had Tuchel, they had Potter, they just had so much turnover that even the players that have been with Chelsea for a long time have to relearn a new system every time, and that takes time. There is an adjustment period. It's even worse for young players. They spent all this money on guys like Romeo Lavia and Moises Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez in the past year, Cole Palmer. And the problem with Chelsea, and I've said this before in many other places, is expectations, right? And a lot of that does come from the fans. Some of it comes from management and ownership. I just don't think it comes from Pochettino. He has been remarkably patient with them, and I want to give him credit for that. But you can't expect a guy like Moises Caicedo, who was great with Brighton last year, to just come into Chelsea with that massive price tag on him and learn a new system and hit the ground running and immediately be a star. That's just not realistic. Same thing with all these other guys. And so that's the downside by having to go out and get all this talent from other places. They're not filling out their roster with enough of their homegrown talent. Look at what Liverpool did with a guy like Conor Bradley. He just slides right in for Trent Alexander-Arnold, and don't get me wrong, he's a step down still because Trent's one of the best right backs in the world. But you can't complain too much about what Conor Bradley's been doing the past few games. And the reason he's able to slot right in is because he knows the system. And yeah, he plays it a little bit differently than Alexander-Arnold does, but he knows the system, he knows the expectations, he knows where he's supposed to be, his teammates know where he's going to be, whereas all these guys at Chelsea are just learning on the fly, and they're all learning Pochettino's system. Some of them came in, last year and they had a different coach, and so it's just, and Frank Lampard was there. God, I had to block that from my mind. I mean, when were these guys ever supposed to learn what their roles are, where they're supposed to be, and how they're supposed to play, and that trust from teammate to teammate? Cole Palmer's a great example. He, got inserted into some playing time at Manchester City and immediately hit the ground running to the point where they were able to sell him for a ton of money. And he's been doing well at Chelsea, but it hasn't been the same because, again, he's got to learn a new system. And why was Manchester City comfortable selling Cole Palmer, knowing full well he was going to develop into a good player? Because they had another one lined up in Oscar Bobb, who appears to be just as ready to take over at the tender age of, I think, 19. And he's able to slot right in, too, because he's come up in that system. He's learned the Pep style. That's another example of a club that has had that longevity and continuity. The Pep style of play and teaching has trickled all the way down to the academy, and he's now been there long enough that these guys that learned it at 10 are now joining the first team. Same with Klopp. Conor Bradley made his Liverpool debut for some of the youth teams at 16, right? So that was 4 years ago. He has learned this Klopp style the entire time. So there really has to be, something said for that. And it's not just that Jurgen Klopp's a great manager. He is in his own right. But the continued stability from having a good manager for all that time really is undervalued and invaluable to club development. Now, should you hold on to a manager who's underperforming simply for that reason? Well, no, not necessarily, particularly if the first team is just being dreadful or showing lack of effort or things like that. But clubs, when they are considering making a move with a manager and looking for a new manager, need to be looking for someone they think can be there long term, and can have that top-down effect down to the academy, because that's where you're going to grow the players. That's where they're going to come in and immediately impress. And even if they don't become first-team regulars, having some good performances, their value will increase, and then you can sell them off and generate some revenue. So there's just so many benefits to it, and so many clubs get it wrong because they just want to go after the quick fix at the first team, the quick fix to save from relegation. And that one I get, but it's a short-term fix. It's a Band-Aid on a much larger problem. That's the issue with all these clubs that are now being linked to Thomas Tuchel. He never stays anywhere for more than a couple years, right? He doesn't get to instill a system from top to bottom. No academy players are being influenced by Thomas Tuchel and his style because he's not there long enough. So maybe they get a taste of it and then he leaves in 2 years and they've got to move on to somebody else's system. And he's done that in like 4 straight stops now over the past decade. So he's not a long-term fix. So yeah, if you want a guy to just come in and try to right the ship and in his case, like you did at Chelsea, win you a Champions League because you had a good underperforming team, hey, that's great. But what's happened since, right? So, the old adage is, flags fly forever, right? Or in soccer, I guess it's trophies, right? Well, they've got a Champions League trophy, sitting in the trophy cabinet, so more power to them. But it's been a disaster since, and part of that is because ever since he got there, there's been a complete lack of continuity and just a revolving door of managers. And at some point, it catches up with you, and it really starts to have effects on player development and the larger picture of the club as a massive organization, not just the first team. These clubs have got to start looking past the first team and the immediate short-term needs of the first team. Chelsea is not alone in this. Manchester United, what should be one of, if not the biggest clubs in the world, certainly should be the biggest club in Europe, but simply is not anymore. And a lot of it has to do with this exact problem, the revolving door of managers that they have had since Sir Alex Ferguson left Manchester United over a decade ago. They've gone from David Moyes to Jose Mourinho to Louis van Gaal to Erik ten Hag. I got the order there wrong. Ralph Rangnick. But they've had this revolving door of managers and, more importantly, very different styles. And now we're coming full circle. Does Manchester United ever learn? This new ownership group says they're going to do things differently, and then they get off to a good start by poaching Omar Barada from Manchester City, but now the rumors come out that they're considering rehiring Jose Mourinho as their next manager, and it's right back to square one. There are so many problems with this. First of all, they still have a manager in Erik ten Hag, and while he's done more than enough to be relieved of his duties, it hasn't happened yet. Controlling media narratives is one of the biggest issues that United has struggled with over the past decade, and letting news slip that you're considering a new manager before firing your old one is a bad way to do business. Then, of course, is Mourinho himself. Now, it's not that he's a bad manager, I'm not going to say that, but United has been a revolving door of coaches for a decade now, with different styles, and they need to find a long-term solution, and Mourinho is not it. He is a 2 to 3 year, burn hard and flame out type manager. Over his 20-plus year career as a head manager, which has included 10 stops, he's averaged 113 games per stop, which is less than 2 years of service with each team. He could help in the short term, but they're going to be right back here soon enough with all the same problems. Jose Mourinho is not the answer. He's not the answer unless you're asking the wrong question. What is the question that Manchester United really wants to have answered? Is it just get us back into the top four? All right, he can probably do that, but to what end, right? He did that one other time and you ended up firing him. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer did that. I forgot to even list him before, and he did it and it wasn't good enough. So what is the question you're trying to answer? The question should be, how do we get back to competing year in, year out with the Manchester Cities, with the Liverpools, and now with clubs like Arsenal, who are clearly, that group, that triumvirate, is an upper echelon above Manchester United and Newcastle and a few of the other bigger clubs. How do we get back to that on a yearly basis? Well, it's not with Jose Mourinho because he's not going to be around that long. 2-3 years at most, and given the combination of the massive personality and media attention that Jose Mourinho will bring, combining it with Manchester United, which always has the microscope on it, has a million pundits on all the news channels because every pundit on British news is a former Manchester United star because they were the star team a generation ago, and that's who ends up doing punditry. So they are under a different microscope than any other club. Jose Mourinho has a bigger personality than just about any other manager, save for some of the other big names like Antonio Conte and guys like that. But, it's an oil and water situation. We saw how it worked the first time. He came in, made an impact, had some success, and then started complaining about not enough investments in the team and blah, blah, blah. And he ends up they part ways after a few years. There's no way this happens any differently this time, right? There is zero chance that Jose Mourinho, at 61 years old, by the way, comes in and has a decade-long run a la Pep or Klopp. There's zero chance of that happening. Absolutely none. Now, could he come in, improve the first team for a year or two, get them back in the top four, get them in the Champions League? That'll help with recruitment a little bit. Yes, he could improve this team. He's a better coach than Erik ten Hag, I'll give you that. But is that really the goal at this point? Is just for these sort of incremental improvements to get back to being competitive, for lack of a better term? Because right now they're not really competitive. They're not competing for top of the table in the Premier League. They're not competing for titles. They're barely even competing for a Champions League spot. They're not even in that. And so if that's the only goal, then fine. Go hire Jose Mourinho and we'll do this again in 2 years. But the goal's got to be better. And by bringing in somebody like Barada from Manchester City, the thing they're trying to emulate is the top to bottom business cohesiveness. That's what City does better than anybody else. And Liverpool, you're right up there with them. Manchester City's operational practices are better than anybody else, and that has nothing to do with money. So to take a guy like Barada from Manchester City signals, okay, that's the sort of thing we recognize and we need to emulate. So that's a good first step. Don't throw it out the window by hiring a 61-year-old who never stays anywhere more than 2 or 3 years. You need to find your Jurgen Klopp. You need to find your Pep Guardiola. Maybe it's Xavi Alonso, a young guy who could come in, establish a system, and be there for a decade. Of course, Liverpool might grab him up first. But you need a guy like that who can be the future for a decade and get the entire club out of that shadow of Sir Alex Ferguson. It's not going to be Jose Mourinho. He's a quick fix. He's a Band-Aid to a much larger problem. And honestly, it just feels like it's a disaster waiting to happen, which has been exactly what has happened with every one of Manchester United's coaching hires over the past decade, and around we go. You really hoped that the new ownership group was going to be different, going to do things in a little bit of a different way. But, if this rumor ends up being true, it ain't it. It's just not it. I'm sorry. As a City supporter myself, I want to see Manchester United get it right. I don't enjoy when Manchester United is a hot mess, right? I don't enjoy when they're a dumpster fire. I want Manchester City to go out and win a title when Manchester United is at their height. The league is better when Manchester United is good. European football is better when Manchester United is good and competing for Champions League titles. It's just like in baseball. Baseball's better when the Yankees and Red Sox are good. Basketball is better when the Lakers are good or the Celtics. It matters. The big clubs, they matter. And so I want to see them get it right and then lose. I'll be very open about that. But I want to see them get it right first, because them being a doormat is really just not fun. That rivalry, now that City has elevated themselves to where they are, just has so much potential for awesome memories and experiences, and that's what this is all about. But it takes two. It takes two to do it. It's been Liverpool and City for 5 or 6 years now, and we'll see how that continues. On this same topic of continuity, you have to hope Liverpool finds somebody who can come close to Klopp, and that is such a tough bar to set, right? But the expectation is there, and no, they don't have to stay there for a decade, but someone who can come in and be a long-term fix, 4, 5, 6 years, something along those lines. The last thing they want is one of these 2 to 3 year turn and burn guys. Mourinho, Tuchel, there are others. They need somebody who's going to come in and implement their system, whether it's the same as Klopp's or different. You could go either way on that one. But somebody who's going to come in and be there for the long haul, because the best clubs are the ones that have a manager who is there for the long haul and has earned it through his success. And then they've got that stability to develop players, to bring in players. Even when you bring in new players, Liverpool has spent a lot of money on the transfer market. They revamped their entire midfield this offseason. Part of the reason their learning curve is so much shorter, other than the fact that they weren't going after 20-year-olds, they were going after more established players like Alexis McAllister and others. But the whole club knows Klopp's system. It's not on just Klopp to teach it to Alexis McAllister, right? You got guys like Mo Salah who've been there forever, and Virgil van Dijk, and they can chip in on teaching these philosophies to the new players as they come in. So that all plays a role. It all starts to snowball. It all goes hand in hand. And Liverpool will get it right because they're a really well-run organization, and they've got the time now to do it. So here's hoping they get it right. I would love to get your comments on this. Get in the comment section below on YouTube if you're watching on there, or hit us up on Twitter at Pints or at Pitchside Pub. I'd love to get the conversation going on there as well. Make sure you subscribe, both here and on Spotify. Thanks as always for joining us on La Pausa, a Pints and Punditry podcast at the Pitchside Pub.